Palab, thank you very much. Well, let's talk to Sir Mark Walport now. After all of that, are you sure you want this
Yes,
job?
it's a rather terrifying agenda, isn't it?
Well,
but it's important stuff.
absolutely. Well, let's see if we can touch on some of those issues. I mean, I guess a particular problem is going to be the tension between the demands of the economy when times are so difficult and the environment. And your predecessor, Sir John Beddington, said that there's a need for urgency in tackling climate change. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I think all issues we've got to look at from the different angles, as it were. So let's take energy. So infrastructure is absolutely crucial for the UK. It's the quality of the infrastructure that distinguishes advanced economies from poorer ones. Take energy, which is an absolutely underpinning infrastructure for everything. When we look at energy, we're only going to get the policy right if we look at it from three different angles, really. So the first angle is energy security. We have to know that the lights will be there to go on.
Is there a risk, do you think, that the lights could go out? Because
Well,
I
mean, let me finish.
We had a warning, didn't we, from one of the big six energy suppliers that could happen?
It's not going to happen in the short term, but it's something that we have to look at all the time. We've also got to look at energy from the perspective of cost. And then thirdly, we've got to look at it through the sort of lens of climate change and sustainability. But unless we look at it from all of those angles, we're unlikely to get the policy right.
And on the question of sustainability, we understand that George Osborne isn't going to commit to having low-carbon electricity by 2030. But then a number of eminent scientists believe that that means the government won't be able to meet its goals on climate change. And I suppose hence what
But as I say, the issue is that we've got to look at it through all three of those lenses. We've got to look at it in terms of energy security. We've got to look at it in terms of it being economically sustainable. Our industrial capacity depends on having affordable energy. People already worry about their energy prices. And absolutely, we've got to consider the environment as well.
But that's interesting that you put the environment third. So would you say that
they're
a
all
lower priority?
No, they're all important. My job as the Government Chief Scientific Advisor is to provide the best possible advice. The policymakers, the politicians, are going to have to look at it through all three of those. They're going to have to consider the science, they're going to have to consider the economics, and they're going to have to consider the politics. My job is to make absolutely clear that they have the best evidence. And on climate, let me be absolutely clear, there is no question that the global climate is warming.
So if you agree with Sir John Beddington there's a need for urgency in tackling climate change, doesn't that mean that the government needs to be acting now to ensure that we're producing low-carbon electricity in the future?
I mean, the answer is this government and governments around the world are acting now. But they've also got to do it in a way that makes sure that the energy supply remains. We have to have secure supplies as well. It's about balancing issues.
Another balancing issue that you're going to have a view on is tension between farmers and some scientists. So do you agree with Lord Krebs, one of the most respected scientists in the country, on the badger cull policy? We heard Palab explaining that he thinks that the current policy is a crazy scheme.
Well, I mean, let's be clear what this is all about. So again, what's badgers about? It's actually about bovine tuberculosis. And bovine tuberculosis ultimately is a human health problem as well. It used to be a serious problem. And so it's about protecting humans and cattle from bovine tuberculosis, on the other hand, whilst having sensible policies to manage the natural world as well. And again, my job is to make the evidence clear. And, to be specific on that, the evidence from trials is that if you take an area of about 150 square kilometres and you're able to cull more than 70% of the badgers, then over a number of years, 7 or 8 years, you would expect a reduction of bovine TB of about 12 to 16%.
But isn't it
those are the data.
But there's
up
a big
to the politicians
if, isn't there?
to decide.
Yes, but there's a big if about whether you've managed to get hold of 70% or not. And isn't that why Lord Krebs expressed his scepticism about it and said that he'd rather go down the vaccination and biosecurity route?
So you're absolutely right. And a critical thing that has to happen is there has to be extremely careful evaluation given the government policy decisions. The badgers were culled in a particular way. And of course that's right. If there was a licensed oral vaccine that was effective, that could be applied, that would be a very good solution. There isn't an oral vaccine for badgers at the moment. There is an injectable vaccine, but that would be very hard to deliver. So again, one's got to look at it from all the different angles. But as I say, my job is, as it were, to make clear what the effects of a badger cull might be and to ask the sorts of question you've just quite legitimately asked, which is, how do you know if you're going to be successful? And that's a key question. My job's to tell the politicians the issue. It's for them to decide, and they will have an opinion. You will have an opinion from this
What's
conversation.
your opinion?
My opinion is irrelevant because it's no more important than your opinion or anyone else's.
Well, I think it'd be a great deal more well-informed. But you're entering into another debate, which is another clash between the economic needs of farming and the environment, and that's over pesticides.
Yeah.
And we had the Environmental Audit Committee of MPs saying the government's being extraordinarily complacent about these neonicotinoids because they say a growing body of peer-reviewed research says that it's having a big impact on pollinators like bees.
Yes. OK, so again, let's look at the broad context. Firstly, neonicotinoids were first introduced in 1993, so they've been in use for about 20 years as a replacement for more toxic insecticides. Why do we use insecticides? Because actually, if we don't have protections, then crops can suffer damage, and that's bad for food sustainability, it's bad for the economy. We also use insecticides, of course, to control insect vector-borne diseases as well. So diseases such as malaria, dengue, sleeping sickness are all carried by insect vectors. So we do actually need insecticides.
But again, if those insecticides are harming pollinators...
Absolutely. So that is the other angle. And there is no question at all that if you look at the evidence, pollinators worldwide, and of course bees are iconic, and actually it's the bumblebee that's more susceptible to neonicotinoids than the honeybee. But you're right, pollinators worldwide are in trouble, but the reasons for that are likely to be very, very complicated. And if you actually look at the scientific evidence is frankly uncertain. So in the laboratory,
should you be applying the precautionary principle, which is what the MPs suggested?
Well, but I think the precautionary principle is something that's often misinterpreted. It's often interpreted that if there's any risk at all, you shouldn't do something. Now, I mean, it's look before you leap, but having looked, it's sometimes sensible to leap. So the precautionary principle doesn't say you should automatically stop doing something if there's any risk. But I mean, I need to finish the point because there is uncertainty. So in laboratory conditions, there's no question that neonicotinoids affect bee behaviour, they affect colony formation. In the field studies that have been done so far in bees in agriculturally treated environments, there is no unequivocal evidence that it does harm bee colonies. Now, we need more research.
And one final question on an issue that's of a high importance, particularly in South Wales, about the current outbreak of measles. What do you think that tells us about public attitudes towards scientific advice?
Well, I think frankly, that was about a piece of extremely bad science and then very bad communication of it. And I think it's an example of how people forget the danger of diseases such as measles. They become complacent when it appears to have disappeared. But it's just, I think, very clear emphasis of the huge importance of vaccination. It was and has been one of the major interventions in public health. And it's absolutely vital that people vaccinate their children.
Sir Mark Walport, many thanks indeed for running through some of the issues in your extremely busy intro.